So, Noncompete put out a video. I guess that's his username because he's not much of a competition. He put out a video that's intended to be an expose on people who are involved in mega communism. People like Jackson Hinkle, people like Haas Infrared, people like Caleb Maupin. Now, I've watched the video, and it's clear to me that Noncompete has no idea what he's talking about, and he has a very shallow, juvenile understanding of what these people believe and who these people are and what their ideas are. Now, my video is going to be focused on Infrared, his critiques of Infrared. I like Jackson Hinkle, and used to like Caleb Maupin, but I've lost respect for him after the sexual allegations of him spanking have came out. Now, my video is going to be focused on his criticisms of Infrared and what Infrared's political ideology is. So, first.
So the American Patriot Socialists worship crypto-fascist figures like Lyndon LaRouche and Nick Land.
This is kind of what defines the nature of my patriotism intellectually and theoretically. I gave it to you, right? You don't have to talk about LaRouche and Dugin and, Nick Land. I mean, those people all influence me.
So, he says that these people worship LaRouche and Nick Land. And he shows a clip of Infrared saying that he's influenced by LaRouche, Nick Land, and Dugin. I mean, the only person who is influenced by Nick Land, or knows who Nick Land is for that matter, is Infrared. Jackson Hinkle doesn't know who he is. Caleb Maupin doesn't know who he is.
Lyndon LaRouche was a fascist who did hideous mind control experiments under the alias Lynn Marcus. Really nasty stuff. There's a lot more to LaRouche and his devious ideology, which started sort of leftist, but has really gone far right through his life.
So he describes Lyndon LaRouche as being a cult leader. Even if he is a cult leader, this idea that, therefore, since they're influenced by LaRouche's ideas, that they are part of Lyndon LaRouche's cult, is false. No. People like Infrared, people like Hinkle and Maupin, they are their own independent thinkers. They have their own ideas about things, and they're influenced by a variety of different people with different ideas. This idea that just because they're influenced by LaRouche, that means they're part of LaRouche's cult, is bogus.
As for Nick Land, he is another neo-fascist. He's a guy who developed much of the quote-unquote dark enlightenment philosophy, which underpins the alt-right movement and which seeks to accelerate capitalism towards fascism. Land believes some really weird shit. For instance, that races should be separated under the belief that elites will enhance their IQs by associating only with each other.
So, Noncompete says that Nick Land wants to accelerate capitalism towards fascism. That's not what Nick Land wants. Nick Land, what he believes is that AI, the robots, are going to take over. I'm not going to deny that he's a racist reactionary, but he is a figure who used to be a Marxist and has been influenced by Marxist thought. What Nick Land believes is that he talks about how capitalism is an alienating force, that it alienates the humanity, and so that it can realize itself. And he thinks that capitalism is accelerating and realizing itself in a way that is non-linear, using non-linear time. And that eventually AI is going to take over, in which case he's going to side with the robots and be in favor of the robots. Now, Infrared is influenced by his ideas, but they are Marxist sort of ideas. But he doesn't agree with everything that Nick Land says.
Alexander Dugin is another figure that the AMPAT socks are obsessed with. He's a Russian fascist and ultranationalist who was a staunch anti-communist in the 1980s Soviet Union and founder of the National Bolshevik Party, so, like, literally one of the OG Nazbols. Now, has attempts some pretty impressive rhetorical backflips to make it sound like Dugin's fascism is the real socialism.
The only reason Dugin is trying to search for some authentic, ideal kernel within fascism against its actual historical manifestation is because, in his view, at this time, to quote, there are, in the 20th century, only 3 ideologies that have managed to demonstrate that their principles are realistic in terms of their political implementation: liberalism, communism, and fascism. Others are absent and are impossible. In Russia, we have passed the 2 ideological stages, communist and liberal. What remains is fascism. So he's just using the word fascism to describe something that's neither the Soviet version of communism nor Western liberalism. And if you actually read the text, that word has nothing to do with its actual, real, historical reality. Something he pretty much acknowledges even in that piece. Dugin is using this word as a stand-in for the ideal of a socialism that, to quote, will be more rural than proletarian, more communal than cooperative, than administrative, more regionalistic than centralistic. All of these are requirements of Russian national specificity, which will find its expression in the doctrine and not only in practice.
So, Noncompete calls Dugin a fascist and an ultranationalist. He says what Infrared is doing is trying to trick his audience into believing that Dugin's fascism is actually communistic. And if you actually watched Infrared's video on the matter, you'd know that he wasn't calling Dugin either of these things, and you'd know that Noncompete is lying. Understand, after the fall of the Soviet Union, people didn't have a lot of faith in communism. They also didn't have a lot of faith in the new capitalist government that replaced it, led by Boris Yeltsin in the 90s. During the 90s in Russia, the standard of living in Russia declined. The society was failing. And so Dugin had this idea. He was very anti-communist, but you've got to understand, he was anti-communist at the time. His idea that he wrote about was this idea that there's a third position that's not it's not socialism or communism. It's also not capitalism. That there needs to be another ideology that would be actually work and lead to a prosperous society in Russia. And that's what he wrote about. If you read Fascism, Borderless and Red, you'd understand that he didn't literally mean fascism when he was talking about fascism. What he meant, he used that word. He used that word regardless of its historical reality, the reality of fascism and what happened in Hitler's Germany and Mussolini's Italy. When he used the word fascism, he was using it as a stand-in for the third position, and so that is, and he wasn't. But that was in the 90s. Since after the 90s, his ideology changed, and he no longer believes that. So this idea that he is a fascist is wrong, and he's also not a nationalist. What Dugin believed at the time was that, and still does believe, is that we need a multipolar world. He believes that there needs to be, that Russian society is its own unique, it has its own, he's not a nationalist, he's a traditionalist who's critical of modernity. He believes that the nationalism, the nation state, is representative of modernity. So what he believes is that there needs to be different poles of the world, and that Russia, he would call it Eurasian society, the Eurasian world, that in Russia, that Russia is part of Eurasia, and it has many different cultures. It's a pluralistic society, and that's what he advocated for. So he wasn't a nationalist.
Of course, this isn't new at all. In fact, this is exactly how Michael Parenti defines fascism in his outstanding book, Black Shirts and Reds. Parenti notes that the essential defining characteristic of fascism is the staging of a pseudo-revolution which mimics many of the trappings and aesthetics of socialist revolution without actually threatening capitalism. Mussolini and Hitler both tried to appeal to the working class by using popular socialist symbols and language. As Parenti writes, the Nazi Party's full name was the National Socialist German Workers' Party, a left-sounding name. Both the Italian fascists and the Nazis made a conscious effort to steal the left's thunder. There were mass mobilizations, youth organizations, work brigades, rallies, parades, banners, symbols, and slogans. There was much talk about a Nazi revolution that would revitalize society, sweeping away the old order and building the new. Of course, these are all false promises. As Parenti explains, fascism is a false revolution. It cultivates the appearance of popular politics and a revolutionary aura without offering a genuine revolutionary class content. It propagates a new order while serving the same old moneyed interests. Its leaders are not guilty of confusion, but of deception. That they work hard to mislead the public does not mean that they themselves are misled. And this is exactly what Haas is doing here, as he presents the obvious fascist ideology of Dugin and then tries to stuff it into a communism-shaped costume. No, guys, seriously, he's just using the word fascism, but he really means communism.
So, Noncompete says that what Infrared and Dugin are doing is what Parenti describes in his book, Black Shirts and Reds, which is doing pseudo-revolution, which mimics the characteristics of communism. The problem with this idea was that in Parenti's book, he was talking about actual political phenomena. He was talking about revolutions like when Hitler seized power in Nazi Germany and when Mussolini took power in Italy. He wasn't talking about intellectuals like Dugin or live streamers like Infrared. He was talking about actual political phenomena. And no, in his video, Infrared does not say that Dugin is using the word fascism, but he really means communism. He says Dugin is not a socialist or a communist. He says that fascism is a stand-in for the third position. The third position being neither capitalism nor communism. Dugin was looking for a different ideology that would actually work in 1990s Russia. And in Fascism, Borderless and Red, there's a section where he talks about national capitalism, and he acknowledges the same thing that Parenti acknowledges, which is that fascism propagates a new order while serving the same old moneyed interests. It is almost beyond doubt that the project of national capitalism or right fascism constitutes an ideological initiative that part of the elite of society which is seriously concerned with the problem of power and feels acutely the power of time. Yet, the national capitalist right-wing variation of fascism does by no means exhaust the nature of this ideology. Moreover, the union of the natural bourgeoisie with the intelligentsia, on which, according to some analysts, the coming Russian fascism will be based, constitutes a glaring example for what actually is entirely alien to fascism as a worldview, as a doctrine, and as a style. The domination of national capital. This is a Marxist definition of the phenomenon of fascism.
And if you look at Dugin's defining characteristics of fascism in his own definition, which insists is really just a stand-in for socialism, you'll see that none of these characteristics, being rural, being communal, being regionalistic, are incompatible with fascism.
So Noncompete states that none of Dugin's defining characteristics of fascism, which Infrared tells us are socialism, are incompatible with fascism. First off, Haas is giving the defining characteristics of the forms of socialism that Dugin thinks apply to the Russian context. And second, look at these defining characteristics again. Rural and proletarian more communal than administrative, more regionalistic than centralistic. These things sound way more like Russian socialism than fascism. The Bolshevik Revolution was led by the rural farmers. It was an unindustrialized nation at the time. And Nazi Germany was super urban, super centralized, and super administrative.
In fact, these are all principles which fascists constantly push since the beginning. The Nazis idolized ruralism. They presented themselves as communal, and they were super regionalistic in how they defined Aryan culture, after all.
So being rural, communalism, and being regionalistic are defining character traits of fascism. The thing is, this contradicts what he just told us about Parenti. He just told us that, according to Parenti, the phenomena of fascism is represented by fascists mimicking the aesthetics of socialism and communism. That's what he said about Dugin. That's what he says about Dugin, but in the case of what Parenti was actually talking about, the actual phenomena of fascism, not just an intellectual, he says he doesn't apply Parenti. He just says, no, those are actual character traits of fascism. So, which is it?
But what's expressly lacking from Dugin's ideology is class character. I mean, Dugin says specifically that his fascism is not proletarian in nature. It's right there on the fucking screen on Haz's stream. It is not rooted in the working class. It does not have a proletarian nature. This is not Marxism.
So Noncompete says that Dugin's ideology lacks class character because he says it's not proletarian in nature. No. First off, it does have class character. Dugin wrote a piece titled Knights Templars of the Proletariat, which is a soliloquy glorifying the working class. He writes, the proletarian will awaken, rebel, murder. Neither the police nor fake socialist parties will be able to hold him back. His mission in history is not finished. Demiurge still breathes. The soul of the world still weeps. Her tears raise a dismal howl in the black consciousness of the Creator. It is a call. It is a factory whistle. It is the sound of angelic trumpets. They, smiths of Tartar, once again yearn for their proletarian revolution. Real revolution. Final revolution. Also, he says that Dugin said that such a socialism will be rural and not proletarian. He didn't say rural and not proletarian. He said more rural than proletarian. And plenty of the great communist revolutionary movements were more rural than proletarian. Were the Russian Bolsheviks more rural than proletarian? Yeah, they were. The Chinese Maoists were more rural, as were the Viet Minh. I could go on. Now, one more thing I'd like to show you is this one part of the video where, on top of Infrared talking about how he believes LaRouche has a comprehensive worldview, Noncompete shows us some cringeworthy quotes of things that LaRouche has said.
So, I'll begin with LaRouche. LaRouche has his idea of the oligarchic principle and the republican principle. And this takes the form of expression and thought of Aristotle versus Plato for LaRouche. And these two tendencies have been struggling with one another across the whole fabric of history. And guess what? LaRouche is right. That pattern is there. That is a very observable pattern, right? The way in which the oligarchic tendency versus the kind of republican, or let's call it the principle of the emperor / the republic versus the oligarchy. Yeah, that's a very clear pattern in history. It is, okay? So he's onto something there. Also, with Aristotle versus Plato, he's also onto something very clearly. LaRouche has a very coherent, universal, all-encompassing worldview. It's not nonsense. It's not schizo nonsense. It's not some cult or whatever where people just believe in it because of his authority. No, he has a very coherent worldview.
So Noncompete has this idea that since the people who Infrared listens to, like LaRouche and Nick Land, aren't Marxists, that therefore, or if they have certain ideas, that certain positions that are, they've said certain things that today we consider racist or sexist or reactionary, that therefore they're not worth listening to at all, because they're not pure, they don't follow the pure principles of what Marxism is supposed to be. I mean, who is non-compete to go around telling us what you have to and have to listen to and not have to listen to as a Marxist? It's absurd. I mean, and he just shows these things that LaRouche has said. Like, what do they have to do with LaRouche's ideas? Imagine, for example, if Einstein developed the theory of relativity. If Einstein had said that black people were inferior to white people, would that discredit the theory of relativity? No, it wouldn't. It has nothing to do with what Einstein developed and his science. By Non-Compete's own logic, he can't be a Marxist because Marx and Engels were racist. They said they believed that Mexicans and Slavs were inferior. Two white guys from the 19th century Europe had racist ideas. What a shock. And the reason why I showed that entire clip of Infrared talking about LaRouche's worldview, his theory of history, was because I want you actually to hear what he was saying. Non-compete, that the reason he put that in, he showed you those quotes, because he didn't want you to listen to what he was actually talking about. He wants you just to think, oh, this guy said some cringeworthy shit, and that therefore he's not worth listening to at all, not worth considering, which is absurd. In conclusion, so Non-Compete has shown that he has a complete lack of knowledge for the politics of people like Infrared and Jackson Hinkle, who engage in MAGA communism. He has shown that he doesn't understand the ideas of Alexander Dugin and has had to rely on dishonesty in order to make Infrared's arguments easier to debunk. Now, let me show you. Haas responded to Non-Compete's video, and here I'm going to show you part of it. But here's what he had to say.
Look how Emmerich leaves the part out where I make explicit that in that piece, Dugin denounces Nazi Germany and Italy as national capitalist. He doesn't even, he says, oh, those aren't real. Fascism was never really tried, is basically where he's coming from in that old piece. What a fucking, see, just witnessing, look, were you guys ever leftists? Hey, Emmerich Johnson, you know, like, half of my audience are former leftists, you fucking fat retard. You know that? You know half of my fucking audience are former leftists. You know what that means? It means now they're in the reason that is because when they watch me, they can look in the POV of how they used to be, and they'd be like, oh my god, if I wasn't watching Haas right now, I would have eaten this shit up like slop. I would have actually believed you. But Haas is exposing the lies and manipulation behind your entire fucking worldview and all the fucking things you say about your political enemies, and suddenly people are like, holy shit, I will never go back to being a leftist because these people are liars. They're so manipulative, they're such fucking liars, and I believed it for so long because I never bothered to investigate it for myself.
So as he said, this is why people like Non-Compete, they're why people leave the left, because people like him, people like Vosh, and other dishonest smear merchants who are supposed to be on the left on YouTube, people like the Young Turks, they lie about certain people and their ideologies and their worldviews, and they pretend to be on the left, but they don't understand Marx, and they don't understand class politics, and they don't understand how to organize and build true anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist movements. So when they find out that these people are lying to them, they don't want to be a part of the left anymore. That's the problem. with the left is that you have these dishonest people like Noncompete who are saying that, who call people who don't, who want to smear other people as being fascists and communists. They don't understand anything that they have to say. So Noncompete has been exposed. Noncompete can't compete with infrared and MAGA communism. So anyway, there you have it.